The story starts with Ethan and Sophie, a couple facing difficulties in their marriage. Despite their issues, they still love each other and want to give their relationship another shot. They visit a therapist, hoping that therapy might help them reconnect and find happiness again. The therapist suggests an unusual approach. He advises them to play a note on the piano, which they do, and then he tells them that there's a lack of harmony between them. To help them reconnect, he recommends they stay at a secluded house for a few days. Ethan and Sophie agree and head to the address provided. The house is cozy and located in a quiet area. Sophie goes to the guest house nearby, and to her surprise, she finds Ethan there. The two grow close, and they end up having an intimate moment. The next morning, Sophie returns to the main house and tells Ethan how happy she is about the previous night. Ethan, however, looks confused and insists that nothing happened between them. Sophie feels unsettled but decides not to press the issue. Later, Ethan visits the guest house, where he finds Sophie cooking bacon for him. This immediately raises his suspicion because Sophie knows he doesn't like bacon. The smell makes him uncomfortable, and he steps outside. When he reaches the main house, he finds Sophie there, too. Ethan is baffled. How could Sophie be in two places at once? He pulls her aside and explains what he just saw. Sophie is skeptical, but Ethan convinces her to go inside and see for herself. When she does, she encounters another version of Ethan, an Ethan who is more charming and appealing than her real husband. This Ethan looks like the one she's always dreamed of. Ethan and Sophie are both confused and disturbed. They start to realize that the guest house seems to contain versions of themselves that are different from who they really are. Ethan suggests that they should leave the place immediately, sensing danger. Sophie agrees, and they pack their bags and head to a nearby restaurant. At the restaurant, they talk about the bizarre experience. Sophie admits that she found it fascinating and suggests they continue the experiment for a while, meeting their counterparts to see what happens. Ethan is hesitant at first, but eventually, he agrees. The couple returns to the house, and they discover that the guest house contains two other people who look exactly like them. To simplify things, they decide to call themselves Ethan 1 and Sophie 1, while the versions in the guest house are Ethan 2 and Sophie 2. Ethan 1 and Sophie 1 decide to explore this strange situation. They agree to meet their counterparts in the guest house, but they set a rule: they must limit their interactions to 15 minutes each time. The couple decides that whoever goes to meet their counterpart must return within 15 minutes and that no one should engage in any physical relationship with their lookalike. They set these rules to keep the experiment under control. Ethan 1 goes to meet Sophie 2, and they have casual conversations before he returns. Likewise, Sophie 1 meets Ethan 2, talks to him, and then leaves. It's like they're living their dreams through these encounters. This strange experiment continues every day. However, Ethan 1 starts noticing strange things. His clothes begin to disappear, and he finds texts from Ethan 2 on Sophie 1's phone. He becomes increasingly suspicious. Meanwhile, Sophie 1 grows fond of Ethan 2, as he matches her ideal image. Ethan 1 realizes that Sophie 1 is becoming attached to her dream version of him. One day, Ethan 1 pretends to be Ethan 2 when he meets Sophie 1. They spend some time together, but he doesn't reveal that he was actually Ethan 1. The next day, Ethan 1 is outside the guest house and discovers that Sophie 1 and Ethan 2 are inside together. Feeling jealous, he knocks on the door repeatedly, but Sophie 1 takes her time to open it because she is caught up with Ethan 2. Eventually, Sophie 1 opens the door, and as Ethan 1 enters, Ethan 2 disappears. Ethan 1 tells Sophie 1 that it's time to end the experiment. They return to the main house, but they are stunned to find Ethan 2 and Sophie 2 already sitting at the table. Ethan 2 and Sophie 2 reveal that they created this game and that they are indeed the real versions of Ethan and Sophie. Ethan 1 becomes frustrated with Ethan 2, especially since he knows his wife is attracted to him. Sophie 1 tells Ethan 1 to leave, and he goes back to the guest house. There, he starts investigating and finds a computer with numerous files and recordings of other couples. He finds a file labeled Ethan and Sophie with recordings of their voices. Listening closely, Ethan 1 realizes that someone has been mimicking his and Sophie's voices to sound just like them. He finally understands that Ethan 2 and Sophie 2 have been imitating them all along. However, as he tries to escape, he discovers that all the doors in the guest house are locked. He tries to open them, but nothing works. The next morning, Sophie too arrives and begins to explain everything. She reveals the truth behind their strange encounter. The story reveals a continuous cycle. When Ethan 1 and Sophie 2 resolve their issues, Ethan 2 and Sophie 2 leave, and Ethan 1 and Sophie 2 remain, waiting for the next couple. This cycle repeats endlessly. Ethan 1 finds all of this absurd and storms off in anger, finding Sophie 1 to explain the situation. He tells her that this is a twisted game and insists they need to leave immediately. Earlier, Sophie 2 had confided in Ethan 1 that her husband, Ethan 2, was developing feelings for Sophie 1, which she didn't like. She expressed her willingness to support Ethan 1, but he remains frustrated, urging his wife to leave and escape all these complications. While Ethan 1 is trying to convince Sophie 1, Ethan 2 arrives and tells Sophie 1 to run away with him, ignoring Ethan 1's warnings. Although Sophie 1 does have feelings for Ethan 2, she's hesitant to take such a drastic step. Realizing this, Ethan 2 runs off alone, with Ethan 1 chasing him. As Ethan 2 runs, he crashes into an invisible wall and collapses unconscious. And the reactions of the two Sophies reveal their true emotions. One Sophie is sad, clearly attached to Ethan 2, while the other smiles as she looks at Ethan 1, curious about his next move. When Ethan 1 goes to get the car, she smiles and invites Sophie to join him. Sophie gets into the car, and they drive away, leaving behind Ethan 2, who remains unconscious as the other Sophie tends to him. Ethan 1 and Sophie then visit the therapist's office, seeking answers about the strange events and the conspiracy behind them. However, they find no one there, only the piano the therapist had asked them to play during their session. With no explanations, they return home. The next morning, Sophie appears unusually cheerful and makes bacon for Ethan 1. This surprises him, as the real Sophie, Sophie 1, never made bacon for him, suggesting that the woman with him is Sophie 2. It turns out that when Ethan 2 was unconscious, Sophie 1 was sad because she cared for him, while Sophie 2 was smiling and watching Ethan 1, waiting for him to choose her. And that's what happened. Ethan 1 unknowingly left with Sophie 2. Now, Ethan 1 realizes he isn't with the real Sophie, but he's with the version that fits his ideal, Sophie 2, who matches his dreams. Accepting this, he decides to stay with her rather than going back. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and share this video. Let us know in the comments if you want to hear about any other stories, and we'll publish them. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, be sure to do so.